on a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being the worst, how do you define the state of our division in this country as compared to history? And the second part, and I'll have each of you answer separately, name one constructive step you would take to help bridge the divide. Jamie, you want to start?
Wait, I'm going to define it with a number. That's right.
And 1 to 10.
1 to 10.
10 being the worst in terms of the most divisive.
How divisive? No, I give it a 7.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what about a suggestion of how we can improve on that 7?
Well, how about we move to ranked choice voting for our elections? Because with ranked choice voting, you've got to get a majority to win. And so maybe I can't get your supporters' first votes, but I could get their second votes. And so you see, it totally eliminates or dramatically reduces negative campaigning because you're vying for the other people's support as opposed to just trying to engage in character assassination. So that's just one that leaps to mind.
Steve.
Yeah.
I'm glad you said 7, my friend. That sets the standard. You know, I was once on a panel with Newt Gingrich when I left Congress, and I left in rare form unindicted and undefeated, which is a triumph these days. And somebody asked a similar question, and I put it at a 10, and then Gingrich reminded me that you know, there was a time when Aaron Burr assassinated Alexander Hamilton, and that was pretty partisan. So
wait, a duel's not an assassination.
Well, that's fair enough. Leave it to a lawyer to make that distinction.
I mean, it was mutually consensual.
I just think we've had the but one did not consent to die. I just want to say. Look, we've had these challenges in the past, but I think social media accelerates it, makes it worse than it ever has been. So I'm glad that I'm going to be a little less optimistic and put it at an 8 to 9 because of social media. And the one thing I would do to improve it would be to prohibit the practice of partisan gerrymandering in drawing up our congressional districts, because right now
important point, absolutely.
When I was elected to Congress in 2000, there were about 125 competitive congressional districts. Today, there are 40. And that's the result of drawing districts further to the left and further to the right, so that most members of Congress have to try and veer to protect their flanks rather than deal with centrism in a general election.
Well said. David.
So I'll back clean up here, and I'll say this. I think we should presume it's a 10. And I love the question because I think this is a real important conversation. I have it with myself sometimes. It's not just voices in my head. I truly have this go back and forth. And the conversation centers around this. Is this really the existential moment for democracy in the United States? And there are a lot of reasons why we should think it is. A lot of reasons. One, because one of the major candidates has told us it is. But if we say it's a 10 and we're ringing the fire bell, are we actually undermining our nation's own resiliency? We have gotten through incredible times in the past, and it's part of the strength of who we are. And so sometimes I want to say it's a 1 because we're strong enough to overcome remarkable moments in history. And I think somewhere in that circular conversation maybe lies the answer, but I think we need to treat it like a 10. And I'll choose my words carefully, but I think you'll understand my sentiment here. I'm not sure healing the nation means sitting around a campfire like it's youth group and everybody getting along. I think we have to defeat some of the partisan winds in the country that are trying to advocate for authoritarianism and the overturning of democracy. And maybe tone and tenor and candidates come into this. It does not have to be a fight against each other, but it is certainly a fight for the future of the country. And for that reason, I think we should consider it a 10.
Well, we will get into that more. Steve, I want to come back to some years ago, you and I did a program together at the Illinois Holocaust Museum, and you shared during this, and this may have been a precursor to Josh Gottheimer's Problem Solvers, that you would go out to a Chinese restaurant once a week. I don't recall if it was 10 or 15 Democrats, 10 or 15 Republicans. You had a mediocre meal. You spent 15 minutes talking about what you disagreed with, 45 talking about what you could agree on.
Yeah.
My question, I guess, is Where are we today with that, and could that even happen?
So I'll give you a little bit of context for those of you who are not aware of what I always consider to be my most liberating and enjoyable moments in 16 years in Congress. It requires a little bit of a preface, and I know that David and Jamie will fully understand this. If you want to understand why Congress, one of the reasons Congress is as dysfunctional as it is, go to the parking lot in the Capitol building on what's called Getaway Day. After the last vote is cast, when 435 members of Congress are like cattle, just leaping down the steps to get in their cars, to leave Washington, D.C., to go back to their districts. And I happen to have had a speech in my district on Long Island on a Thursday night, and we voted at 4. I was scheduled to go on at 7. And I put my card in, voted, and just leapt to the front of the line, and there was this congressman right in front of me who was a little too slow. And his name, you served with him. He was gone before you came. His name was Tim Johnson, Republican from Illinois. And he was just taking his time opening the door. So I did what any New Yorker would do. I just leapt in front of him and pulled the door. And I'm not embellishing. These are bomb-resistant doors. The lower corner grabbed his shoe, slid it, and he went down in pain with a, ow! And I continued to do what any New Yorker would do. I just leapt in front of him and kept going to the car. And about a week later...
We could have used you at the insurrection.
About a week later, we happened to be in the members' gym, and there's this guy next to me, and he's on the elliptical, and I'm on the bike, and he says, "You don't remember me, do you?" And I said, "No." He said, "You destroyed my shoe. You made me bleed. You brought me down." And I said, "Well, you probably should get better shoes next time." Anyway, this is what we noticed, that in the members' gym, there's competition, but it's fun, it's spirited, it's respectful. Nobody's calling each other names. As soon as we get showered, get dressed, go literally 2 floors up on the elevator and go on the floor of the House, that's when the fists come out. And so we decided to do an experiment. I'll just condense it. We created something called the House Center Aisle Caucus. We met at the Hunan Dynasty Chinese restaurant once a month because it was close to the Capitol for votes and also ridiculously cheap, and it had 18 health code violations, but that doesn't stop a member of Congress in search of a deal. And 15 Dems, 15 Republicans, and every meeting started the same way. We had a kitchen timer, 5 minutes, pick a topic, Obamacare. 5 minutes, state your disagreements. 55 minutes, what can we agree on? And this is what we learned. There's a reason, Democrats and Republicans are going to disagree most of the time, and that's fine. There's a reason that David Jolly was a Republican, now he's an independent, and that I'm a Democrat. The problem with Washington is Congress is so hung up on the 60% or 70% that they're never going to agree on that they forget that there's 40 or 30% that they can agree on instantly. And so we decided that that would be our model. The Center Aisle Caucus died within several months because the Tea Party came to town, and moderate Republicans would come up to me and say, "I have to resign because my opponent is using my membership on the Center Aisle Caucus in a primary to defeat me." And Democrats would say, "I can't participate in this because I just can't afford a primary for my left." And these days, negotiating in the center is bad politics. And so it ended. And I don't see, with the exception of the problem solvers, I don't see a replacement to that because with gerrymandering, you get vilified for compromising instead of rewarded for it.
Well, that's scary. That sort of leads in, and you used a magic word into my next, and I welcome any of you responding to this, the dysfunction in Congress. You know, I researched it. I think in the last 3 years, you have something like 57 members of Congress that have quit. But increasingly of late, including Ken Buck and Mike Gallagher, you have, quitting midterm. And that's an unusual phenomenon to me. So I'd welcome Jamie, David, any of you comments on, have we ever seen this level of desire to leave the institution that you've all so well served?
Well, but I want to disagree a little bit with my friend Steve about this because the premise of your last statement, Steve, seemed to be like if we could just get the moderates from both sides together, if we could have lunch together, we could dine together, and so on. And I actually don't think that that's where progress or healing comes from. I mean, generally, there have been profound struggles in our history, whether we're talking about the Civil War or the Civil Rights Movement or the struggle over Social Security, which was called socialism and communism when it started. But it has been really through social movements. I mean, think about the LGBTQ movement. That wasn't by Democrats and Republicans sitting together, having dinner and deciding that we can really work this out. It was through profound social change that we got through all of those things. And in the case of the Civil War, it took a war because there were people who were dead set determined on holding on to slavery and that system of social relationships. So the nonviolent passage of the country out of wrenching pain and injustice took place in movements like the Civil Rights Movement, where people put their bodies and their minds on the line. And that's really how the change comes. And then the people who are in politics generally come to reflect that as they hear from, as they either participate in or they hear about the changes that are taking place. So I think we are in this moment of wrenching social and political struggle in 2024 to defeat a movement of authoritarianism, racism, fascism, anti-Semitism, anti-immigrant bigotry, and we're not going to be able to defeat it on our own in Congress, no matter
I agree.
How polarized we get or how sweetly we talk to each other. It's going to take an election, and that's why democracy is such a beautiful thing, because I'm convinced the vast majority of the people reject Donald Trump and his party, and he's going down hard in November of 2024.
Well, David, let me let you comment, but you and I talked offline, and I'd like you to tell this audience a little of what you said to me about how this is a fight. It's as Jamie said, it's an existential threat. And what you said, you were on MSNBC a few days ago where you gave partial credit to Pence, former Vice President Pence, for agreeing not to vote for what Hillary calls the former guy. I don't have to utter his name, but you didn't give him credit because of the fact. Why don't you spell that out a little?
Well, on that specific issue of the number of Republicans who are coming out saying, I just can't vote for Donald Trump. If you can't vote for Donald Trump because of his tax policy or labor policy, fine. Maybe I wouldn't ask that you consider voting for Joe Biden. But if you're out there on the street saying, Donald Trump's not fit for office, he's a threat to our democracy, and he's a danger to the free world, then the next thing you need to say is, that's why I'm voting for Joe Biden. And that's true of Mike Pence. We're 8 years into this. This is not a case of first impression. This is not 2016 where you get to hem and haw. And God bless Nikki Haley for calling Donald Trump dangerous, but when she turns around and says, but Joe Biden's more dangerous, it's just not believable. And so, maybe half credit, I don't know. I think half credit's still an F in grade school. But but I want to piggyback on a couple things that have been said, because at the root of this is also a reward system that goes to electoral reforms. Steve Israel was always the guy in charge of the committee who was trying to beat me and spending a ton of money against me in my congressional races.
Yeah, it worked out real well.
Well, listen. Hard-hitting, effective ads that left me throwing stuff at the TV. But my biggest problem was not his ads, even in a district that Obama won. They were great. It wasn't my biggest problem. My biggest problem was my own party in a closed primary state in a gerrymandered district that they wanted a super rabid Republican who wanted to go to war with Democrats. There was no reward for the moderation. And that was as a Republican member who supported, at the time, marriage equality, gun safety legislation, climate change, campaign finance reform. My own party did not want me, and Steve's out there trying to kill me. And it was for no other reason than just the construct, because we have not worked through a lot of these electoral reforms that could improve our politics. But then I want to wrap in something Jamie said, because this
Can I interrupt for 1 second?
Yeah.
Just to spell out the logic of what you said so people see that. The Republicans are always targeting the most moderate Democrats, and the Democrats are always targeting the most moderate Republicans because they come from the closest districts, the swing districts.
That's right.
So
Exactly.
David Jolly would be you probably had nothing against him personally, but he'd be a natural target for you.
Yeah, I was in one of
He
those
was an
swing
Obama
seats
district,
that.
But there's a way
right.
out of that, as Steve was saying, to get rid of partisan gerrymandering, move to multi-member districts, and use proportional representation like ranked choice voting.
But-
And it will immediately eliminate that kind of politics.
It will. But then I think throughout this conversation, we kind of conflate civility with progress. And electoral reform would elect a lot more people that are civil because they would be rewarded for it. They would look for compromise. But I think Jamie's exactly right that if we're still electing the wrong people, we're standing in the way of progress. And the only way to heal the nation is to ensure that everybody's vote counts, that everybody's suffrage is in place, that there are no marginalized communities, that you can be who you can love who you can love, and you get to participate in democracy regardless of income or zip code. That only happens by advancing policies that today are being obstructed by some of the major players on the conservative side. And that's where, again, tone and civility matter. And I think all of us would agree with that. But there are political movements that have to be defeated right now if we're ever going to have a nation that's healed.
Can I just, I don't think we disagree, actually. Look, if members, to David's point, if there is no incentive for members to agree to a compromise on a bill, you're not going to get bills passed as a matter of compromise. And I've concluded that Congress is not going to be the place that saves democracy. I hope it is, and that if it's going to be saved, it's going to be saved as a result of the leadership of Jamie Raskin. We're going to have to change who we are electing, but we're also going to have to change the districts that elect those members so that they don't feel punished when they want progress. And I'll give you one specific example. I can't tell you how many Republican moderate members of Congress told me that they had to vote against gun safety bills, even though they believed in those bills because they were afraid they'd lose a primary. That's just a warped system, and that has to be reformed.